Richard Widmark wasn't like the other stars in Hollywood. You'd never catch him strolling in late to a set or phoning in his performance. For him, acting wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility. And let's be clear, in an industry built on ego and glamour, Richard's commitment to his craft made him stand out. While most actors coasted, relying on charm, Richard prepared. He wasn't just memorizing lines, he was becoming the character. So what happens when someone like Richard, who believes in respecting the art above all else, crosses paths with others who treat acting like a game? If Richard Widmark had to make a list of actors he couldn't stand, Tony Curtis would certainly be at the top. In 1964, Widmark found himself co-starring with Curtis in The Longships, an adventure film that promised passion and intensity. But what Richard discovered on set was a very different kind of performance. Curtis seemed more concerned with his appearance than with the role he was supposed to embody. While Richard spent hours preparing, diving deep into the core of his character, Curtis was busy spending long periods in the makeup chair, obsessing over his look. It wasn't uncommon for him to show up late or neglect the script in favor of perfecting his image. This obsession with style over substance only frustrated Richard more. For Widmark, an actor's integrity and preparation were paramount. He couldn't understand why Curtis treated acting as a showcase, a mere display of his natural charm and polished looks. To Richard, acting wasn't about putting on a mask. It was about becoming the character, and that meant emotional commitment and depth. The tension between them became palpable. Curtis, with his natural charisma and perfect appearance, seemed to think that would be enough, but for Richard, it wasn't enough to simply look the part. You had to live it. Richard once reportedly said about Curtis, "He's all style and no substance." This line summed up the problem perfectly. As his career progressed, Richard found himself clashing with even bigger Hollywood names. The legend himself, Frank Sinatra. In 1968, Richard Widmark found himself on set with a man who couldn't have been more different from him, Frank Sinatra. They were both stars, both legends in their own right, but their approach to acting, that was a different story. Widmark, the man who never showed up late and always came prepared, found himself clashing with Sinatra's lackadaisical attitude. While Richard would spend hours studying the script, analyzing his character, and ensuring every line had weight, Sinatra showed up when he felt like it and at times barely seemed to care. The tension on the set of The Detective was palpable. Crew members whispered about Sinatra's casual approach, showing up late, rushing through his scenes, and treating the film like a side gig. Richard, on the other hand, believed that if you were going to be in the business of storytelling, you had to do it properly. His respect for the craft couldn't handle Sinatra's reckless charm. For Sinatra, it was all about charisma showing up, turning on the charm and relying on his star power to carry him through. But Richard couldn't buy into that. To him, acting wasn't about showmanship. It was about substance. It was about craft. So what happened when a man who treated his craft like a sacred responsibility came face to face with a man who saw it as just another gig? It didn't take long for Richard to decide. He wasn't going to stand for it. He walked off set. This wasn't just about Sinatra. The truth was, Richard Widmark didn't just clash with him. He clashed with anyone who didn't share his unshakable belief in the art of acting, and that would lead him to even greater conflicts with some of Hollywood's biggest names. Marlon Brando. The name alone sent shockwaves through Hollywood. A man whose acting was legendary, whose methods were, well, chaotic. And yet Richard Widmark, who had spent his career perfecting discipline and focus, couldn't help but see Brando's approach as a disaster. Widmark never worked directly with Brando, but their paths crossed enough that Richard had strong opinions about him. Brando, with his method acting the unpredictable improvisational style that left many wondering whether he even memorized his lines, was everything Richard couldn't stand. Richard believed acting was about preparation, structure, and understanding. Brando, he relied on pure chaos. It wasn't enough for Brando to play a role. He had to become the character, even if it meant throwing out the script and creating havoc on set. Richard's acting, on the other hand, was meticulous. Every movement was calculated. Every line was delivered with intent. Widmark, who believed in the power of restraint and the art of telling a story through subtlety, was baffled by Brando's willingness to throw everything out the window for a moment of spontaneity. The contrast was glaring. As Widmark once said, "Some actors need chaos to create, but I prefer focus." Brando wasn't the only one in Hollywood whose methods rubbed Richard the wrong way. There were others who, like Brando, would push his patience to the limit. We'll explore the tension between Richard and one of Hollywood's most famous cool cats, Robert Mitchum. By the time Richard Widmark crossed paths with Robert Mitchum, he had already made it clear there was no room for laziness on his set. His approach to acting was built on discipline, preparation, and commitment. So when Mitchum, the ultimate cool cat of Hollywood, showed up on set, it was clear they were on two different planets. Mitchum didn't see the need to prepare for roles. To him, acting was about showing up, hitting his mark, and delivering the lines with cool indifference. As he famously said, "I just show up, hit my mark, and say the lines." So when Mitchum casually strolled onto set, barely acknowledging the script, barely thinking about the character, Richard's frustration boiled over. To Richard, Mitchum's approach was disrespectful not only to the craft, but to the audience. How could Mitchum, with his laid-back, just-show-up mentality, ever expect to connect with the audience the way Richard did? The difference in their approach was stark. But Mitchum wasn't the only one who rubbed Richard the wrong way. There was another actor, even more intense, and with a whole different set of issues. Enter Kirk Douglas, the man who might have been Richard's biggest rival yet. When it came to Kirk Douglas, Richard Widmark found himself facing his biggest challenge yet. Two actors, both intense, both demanding, but for very different reasons. And while their on-screen performances often shared a raw power, off-screen, their egos clashed like a storm waiting to break. Kirk Douglas was a powerhouse, no doubt. But for Richard, there was something about Douglas's need to dominate every scene that rubbed him the wrong way. It wasn't just the intensity, it was the way Douglas demanded to be the center of attention, even if it meant stealing the show from his co-stars. Widmark, a man who believed deeply in the integrity of acting, couldn't stand that. He wasn't the kind of actor to compete for attention. He believed that if the story was strong enough, the character would speak for itself. But Douglas, he seemed to think the story wasn't enough unless he was at the center of it all, grabbing every moment, commanding every scene. There were rumors that Richard had turned down roles opposite Douglas, believing that there was only room for one storm on set. As one source put it, Richard believed there was no room for two hurricanes in a scene. His philosophy was simple. In a performance, there should be a balance. But when Douglas was around, that balance was gone. He was too much. And for Widmark, that wasn't just bad acting, it was bad art. But the conflict went beyond just acting. Richard was a man who believed in respect, in collaboration, in the story over the ego. Kirk Douglas, for all his talent, seemed to have an entirely different approach, one that was about personal dominance over the collective effort. And for Widmark, that was a deal breaker. But even with all these confrontations, Richard Widmark remained the epitome of professionalism. He didn't air his grievances in public. He didn't lash out. He simply walked away when the respect wasn't there. He didn't play the game Hollywood wanted him to. He didn't play by their rules of fame, glamour, or quick satisfaction. Instead, he built a career on his own terms. His legacy is more than the roles of ruthless villains and gritty anti-heroes. It's about a man who showed that true strength lies in commitment, focus, and humility. Richard Widmark's name will forever be linked to Hollywood's golden age, but his true legacy lies in the way he carried himself with dignity. Even when the spotlight dimmed, his character remained as strong as ever. And that's what we'll remember him for. Behind the camera, in the silence between the lines, Richard Widmark's story wasn't just one of stardom. It was the story of a man who stood for something bigger than fame, a man who believed that acting was an art, and that respect for the craft would echo louder than any applause. So the next time you watch one of Richard's films, remember it wasn't just his performance that made him great. It was the integrity behind it. It's over for today. I hope you liked the video. Don't hesitate to subscribe to follow the secrets of the biggest icons in history. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe to follow the secrets of the biggest icons in history.